If you had to be out driving or walking even this morning, you were probably thankful for road salt to clear all that ice. But in general, road salt is bad for the environment. It can contaminate soil and water. And there's an effort underway to reduce how much salt plows apply. One North Country county has become a statewide leader in this regard while still keeping roads safe. That's today's story of the day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from the Wild Center in Tupper Lake, dedicated to strengthening visitors' connections to the natural world. More at wildcenter.org.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Monday, December 29th. First up, New York State assessment results are in for grade schools. Noelle Evans with the New York Public News Network spoke with a SUNY scholar about what the results mean.
They're just tools, like a thermometer. They tell us how healthy we are, not necessarily why.
That's Chris Wilkins. He's an associate professor of education at SUNY Brockport. Test scores show that across the state, about half of students in grades 3 through 8 demonstrated proficiency in English language arts and math. Wilkins sees it as part of a larger trend.
You can actually see the dips in test scores starting about 2012 to 2015, both in New York State and at the national level.
That's about when smartphone popularity took off. Wilkins is cautiously optimistic that the statewide ban of personal internet-enabled devices in classrooms might shape future test scores.
It's important only if it leads to more engaging experiences or increased student engagement in the classroom.
He says if there is a causal relationship between scores and distractions in school, that shift might not be seen for another 3 to 5 years. In Rochester, I'm Noelle Evans for the New York Public News Network.
Lake Placid will now host a World Cup ski event originally planned for Utah. That's because the Northeast has a lot more snow than the West right now. That region is experiencing drought and low snowfall so far this winter. Last week, the International Ski Federation announced the move. Its freestyle aerials competition will now take place on January 11th and 12th in Lake Placid. In the last 6 years, Warren County, which includes Glens Falls, has reduced its road salt usage by over 30%. Reporter Amy Feiereisel spoke with the county's superintendent of public works, Kevin Hajos, about how his department made that change. He says one of the biggest challenges was changing the expectations people have about winter roads, which he says were set during the 1980 Olympics in Lake Placid.
When the Olympics were going on, they wanted roads to be clear for everybody to travel to Lake Placid. So that started, everybody expected to have clear roads. And that stayed in place forever.
Can you tell me, what did that look like?
You know, it used to be the guys would go out 5 years ago and they would turn on the salt spreader and it would be on one speed and that would be it. And you would see it because you'd pull up to an intersection and the salt spinner was still spinning. and they'd have, the tons of salt sitting in an intersection, but today they don't do that anymore. So that was the hardest part for us, was just a culture change within the department. I've had guys who have plowed for 30 plus years and their mindset was, I've been driving for 30 years. You're not going to tell me what I know and don't know. So that was the hardest part for us. Since then, my drivers, my staff here in the highway department, everybody, jumps into it, takes ownership of it, and that shows.
Okay, so let's go back in time a bit, back to the beginning. Can you tell me about why and when the county started trying to reduce its road salt use?
This whole premise started with protecting Lake George. They were seeing high chloride levels, sodium contents in Lake George, which I don't want that to happen. Certainly for me and for, my kids and for, many generations to come. We were approached probably about 6 years ago by the LGA. They had informed the county that they had some grant money and they'd be willing to help us get equipment, get some training if we would, start the process of reducing our road salt usage. So at least from my end of it and kind of the management side of it, we were all on board with it. It's not just Lake George. It's every water body, whether it's a stream, a lake, a river around Warren County, around the state.
Excessive road salt runs off into waterways, gets into groundwater and wells. When it accumulates in soil, it kills vegetation. And it's corrosive to infrastructure like pipes and bridges. Hajo says the grant money from the Lake George Association allowed the department to buy a bunch of new equipment to transition to making brine, a salt and water mixture, which uses a lot less salt. They also made technical upgrades.
We actually put what we refer to as live edge plows on most of our trucks that move up and down with the road. So if you had wheel path rutting in the road that you'd have to salt more, now these articulating blades can get down into those areas to clean out that snow. It allowed us to get cameras on our roads, trackers on our trucks. I mean, we sit and look after every storm or every couple of storms and say, hey, what went wrong? What went right? What do we need to change and why do we need to do it?
Okay, so, what came from that? What are the actual numbers of how you've been able to reduce?
Probably 5 or 6 years ago, when we started off and we started tracking, we were somewhere in the 400, 500 pounds per lane mile putting down salt. Today, after last winter, we were down to 232 pounds per lane mile. That's a huge difference. We hope to be down to the 200, just below that again. And it's one of those things I tell everybody, depending on the type of storm we have, if it's an ice storm or if it's a continuous storm that lasts, for a day or a day and a half, that it's kind of all bets are off on that. That's where things change a little bit because my first priority always, Amy, is public safety.
The balance of public safety and environmental impact is something Hajos has spent a lot of time thinking about. In 2020, he was appointed to the Adirondack Road Salt Reduction Task Force, which released its final recommendations in 2023. Today, the state is expanding on those efforts in its Don't Be Salty New York campaign, which actually takes its name from a local campaign launched by 80K Action. The DEC also started a grant program last year to help communities buy equipment to help reduce road salt usage. But Hajo says there's still a lot of work to be done.
You go back to the culture change, it's hard to get people convinced to do it. And then the other mindset of all the superintendents that I know across the state is it comes back to a liability issue. Does the state government do some type of tort reform or something so that the liability is not on us? One of the other things that we talked about is funding. You want counties, towns, villages to reduce their salt usage. And if you want to go to the extent of doing it statewide, then provide more funding for our CHIPS, Pave New York, Pave Our Pothole programs. If I had good roads and I had no issues with any of my roads and water and snow could melt and shut off, I would use much less salt. And this year moving forward in our kind of advocacy to the Senate and the Assembly and to the governors, we're looking for an extra $250 million in our roads.
What Hajos doesn't support are specific limits or maximums of how much salt can be used by highway departments.
Public safety comes first, plain and simple. I think there's a push at the Senate level or the Assembly level in New York State to require, you can't put more than this amount of salt down, which to me doesn't make sense because as I said earlier, it's all dependent upon the storm that you have. So to set some limit, I don't know that's necessarily the thing that we should be doing.
That was Kevin Hajos, Warren County's Superintendent of Public Works, speaking with Amy Feiereisel about how the county has reduced its road salt usage in recent years. We have more news all the time on our website, ncpr.org. Music today by I Am Snow Angel of Lake Placid and Dan Berggren of Ballston Spa. I'm David Sommerstein, North Country Public Radio.